The morning sunlight spilled through the small apartment window, casting golden hues over the stacks of half-finished canvases and the clutter of paint-streaked brushes. David Carter sat hunched over his latest work, his fingers speckled with shades of blue and green, lost in the world of his creation. His studio apartment was small and modest, but it was his sanctuary, a place where his passion for art came alive, despite the constant struggle to make ends meet. David was no stranger to adversity. Born and raised in the heart of Chicago, he had faced more than his fair share of challenges. His neighborhood was a patchwork of beauty and hardship, much like the abstract pieces he poured his soul into. Every brushstroke he laid on the canvas carried stories of resilience, of hope, and of the vibrant culture that shaped his world. But the art world wasn't always kind to people like David, young, black, and unconnected. Despite his talent, he had been rejected time and time again by galleries and art dealers who saw no value in his work. But David believed in his art. He believed in its ability to tell stories that words could not. That morning, as he sipped on a lukewarm cup of instant coffee, he scrolled through his phone, looking for opportunities. A flyer for a gallery exhibition caught his eye, Emerging Artist Showcase, hosted by Victoria Harding's Elite Art Gallery. The words struck a chord in him. Victoria Harding was a name that carried weight in the art world. Her gallery was considered the pinnacle of success, a place where careers were made. David hesitated for a moment, his thumb hovering over the phone screen. The application fee was steep, but he decided to take the chance. He submitted his portfolio, attaching photos of his most prized pieces. A week later, he received an email. Dear Mr. Carter, thank you for your submission to the Emerging Artist Showcase. We would be delighted to review your work in person. Please bring your portfolio and a sample piece to our gallery on Friday at 3 p.m. Best regards. Victoria Harding *. David's heart raced. This was his chance to break through the barriers that had held him back for so long. He spent the next few days preparing, fine-tuning his portfolio, and selecting the perfect piece to represent his work, a large, abstract painting titled Resilience, inspired by his mother's unwavering strength during tough times. When Friday arrived, David dressed in his best outfit, a simple but neat blazer over a crisp white shirt, and carefully packed his painting. As he made his way to the gallery, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and anxiety. Victoria Harding's Elite Art Gallery was a stark contrast to David's world. The building was sleek and modern, with glass doors that shimmered under the midday sun. Inside, the space was immaculate, with high ceilings and pristine white walls adorned with works of established artists. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume and freshly brewed coffee. David approached the front desk, where a receptionist greeted him with a polite but distant smile. May I help you? She asked. I'm here for the Emerging Artist Showcase, David replied, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. The receptionist glanced at him briefly, before nodding. Right this way, she said, leading him to a smaller room where a handful of other hopeful artists were waiting. It wasn't long before Victoria Harding herself entered the room. She was an elegant woman in her late 40s, dressed in a tailored suit and exuding an air of authority. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, lingering momentarily on each artist, before moving on. When it was David's turn to present his work, he approached Victoria with confidence, holding his painting carefully. Thank you for this opportunity, he began, offering her a warm smile. This piece is called Resilience. It's inspired by... Victoria cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. Let me see it, she said curtly. David hesitated but unfolded the protective covering, revealing the vibrant, textured masterpiece beneath. The painting seemed to pulse with energy, its layers of color and movement drawing the eye. But Victoria barely glanced at it. Her lips curled into a faint smirk as she crossed her arms. Abstract, I see, she said with a tone that dripped with condescension. It's colorful, I'll give you that. David felt a knot form in his stomach. It's more than just color, he said, his voice firm. It's about the struggles and triumphs that define us. It's about... Listen, Victoria interrupted, her tone icy. This isn't the kind of work my clientele is looking for. They want sophistication, refinement, something that speaks to the elite. She gestured vaguely at the painting. This is amateur at best. The other artists in the room shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between David and Victoria. David's hands tightened around the edges of his painting. He felt the sting of humiliation but refused to let it show. Art is supposed to speak to everyone, he said, his voice steady. Not just the elite. Victoria let out a soft, derisive laugh. Well, good luck with that, she said, turning away. As David left the gallery, his heart heavy but his resolve unshaken, he noticed a woman watching him from across the room. She was elegantly dressed, with an air of quiet confidence. Unlike Victoria, her expression was one of curiosity and interest. Excuse me, she said, approaching him. I couldn't help but notice your painting. It's remarkable. David blinked, surprised by her words. Thank you, he said cautiously. The woman extended her hand. I'm Sophia Langston, she said. I'm an art collector, and I think your work has immense potential. May I see more of it? David hesitated for a moment before nodding. Of course, he said, a glimmer of hope returning to his eyes. As they exchanged contact information, David couldn't help but feel that this encounter was the beginning of something new, a turning point in his journey. And he was right. The streets were bustling as David stepped out of the gallery, clutching his painting tightly. The crisp autumn air stung his face, but it couldn't compare to the sting of Victoria Harding's words. The weight of her dismissal hung heavy in his chest, but David had faced worse. He had been underestimated before, and he knew this wasn't the end of his story. As he walked back to his apartment, his mind raced. Victoria's elitism wasn't just about his art, it was about him. He had seen the way her gaze barely acknowledged him, the disdain in her voice. It was a reminder of the gatekeeping that defined so much of the art world, where talent often took a backseat to privilege and appearances. But David wasn't angry. He was determined. That evening, he laid out his canvases across his small living room floor. Each painting told a story, a piece of his life, his culture, and the emotions that couldn't be confined to words. He ran his hand over the textured surface of resilience and thought about the strength his mother had taught him. Not everyone will see your worth, she had told him once, but you don't need them to. You just need the right person to believe in you. Her words echoed in his mind as he picked up his phone. He scrolled through his emails until he found Sophia Langston's message. She had reached out just hours after their brief meeting at the gallery, expressing genuine interest in his work. David hesitated for a moment before typing a reply. Hi Sophia. Thank you for your kind words earlier. I'd love to show you more of my work. When would you be available? He hit send and exhaled deeply. It wasn't long before his phone chimed with a response. David. I'd be delighted to see more. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? I can come to your studio. Best. Sophia. David smiled. Maybe this was the break he had been waiting for. The next day, David spent the morning cleaning his apartment and arranging his paintings in a way that showcased their depth and variety. By the time Sophia arrived, the space had transformed into a mini gallery of its own. Sophia stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. She was dressed elegantly, but there was a warmth in her demeanor that set David at ease. These are incredible, she said, her eyes scanning the room. She walked slowly, pausing at each piece to take it in fully. There's so much emotion in your work. It's raw, authentic, and powerful. Thank you, David said, his voice tinged with both gratitude and disbelief. He wasn't used to this level of praise. Sophia stopped in front of Resilience. This one, she said, her voice almost a whisper. It's breathtaking. What inspired it? David hesitated for a moment, unsure how much to share. But something about Sophia's genuine interest encouraged him to open up. It's about my mother, he said finally. She was a single parent, raising me in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce. But she never let me feel like I couldn't achieve something. This painting is about her strength, her resilience. Sophia nodded, her eyes never leaving the canvas. That's exactly what I feel when I look at it. You've captured something universal here, something that speaks to anyone who's ever faced hardship. She turned to face him. David, your work deserves to be seen by the world. I'd like to help you make that happen. David blinked, taken aback. What do you mean? I know people who would love your art, Sophia explained. Collectors, gallery owners, even auction houses. I can introduce you to them. But more importantly, I want to buy a few of these pieces myself. David's heart raced. He had sold a few paintings before, but never to someone of Sophia's stature. You really want to buy them? Absolutely, she said with a smile. And this one, resilience, is at the top of my list. Over the next few weeks, Sophia became both a mentor and an advocate for David. She introduced him to her network of art enthusiasts, and before long, his paintings were featured in small exhibitions. Collectors began to take notice, and word of his talent spread like wildfire. Victoria Harding, meanwhile, remained oblivious to the rising star she had once dismissed. Her gallery continued to cater to the same circle of wealthy clients, but whispers of a new artist shaking up the scene began to reach her ears. One evening, as Victoria sipped champagne at an exclusive event, a fellow gallery owner mentioned an upcoming auction featuring a piece by some young genius named David Carter. David Carter? Victoria repeated, the name tugging at a faint memory. Why does that sound familiar? Her companion shrugged. Apparently, his work is stunning. One of his pieces sold for 6 figures last week. He's the talk of the art world right now. Victoria's smile faltered. 6 figures? The name nagged at her, but she couldn't quite place it. Unbeknownst to her, the artist she had dismissed as amateur at best was on the brink of becoming a sensation, one that would soon shake the very foundations of her carefully curated world. David Carter sat quietly in the back of the bustling art exhibition, the soft murmur of conversations blending with the clinking of glasses. It was his first major showcase, a small but prestigious gallery that Sophia had connected him with. The event was titled Voices Unheard, featuring works by underrepresented artists. David's pieces occupied an entire wall, their vibrant colors and layered textures drawing a steady stream of admirers. His heart swelled with a mix of pride and disbelief as he watched people discuss his work, their faces lighting up with admiration. I heard this piece is by that new artist, David Carter, a woman whispered to her friend as they stood in front of Resilience. Yes, and it's already been sold, her friend replied. Sophia Langston bought it for her private collection. She's calling him the next big thing in modern art. David glanced at Sophia, who stood nearby, gracefully navigating the crowd. She caught his eye and smiled, giving him an encouraging nod. The evening was a success beyond anything David could have imagined. By the end of the night, 2 more of his pieces had sold, and he had exchanged contact information with several collectors eager to see more of his work. Over the next few months, David's career skyrocketed. Sophia's connections opened doors he never thought possible. His paintings were featured in magazines, and his name began to appear in conversations about the future of modern art. But David wasn't just a passive participant in his success. He worked tirelessly, pouring his soul into each new piece. His art became a reflection of his journey, the struggles, the triumphs, and the resilience that had carried him through. One day, as David was working in his studio, Sophia called with exciting news. David, I've arranged for one of your pieces to be auctioned at the Hawthorne Auction House next month. This is a huge opportunity, it's one of the most prestigious auctions in the country. David nearly dropped his paintbrush. An auction? Are you serious? Very serious, Sophia replied. And I have no doubt your work will fetch an incredible price. David spent the next few weeks preparing for the auction, carefully selecting the perfect piece to represent his vision. He chose a large, dynamic painting titled Eclipsing Shadows, a powerful work that symbolized breaking free from doubt and adversity. The night of the auction was a whirlwind. Held in a grand hall adorned with chandeliers and velvet drapes, the event was attended by some of the most influential figures in the art world. David sat near the back, his nerves on edge as the auctioneer began introducing the pieces. When it was time for Eclipsing Shadows to be unveiled, the room fell silent. The painting's bold colors and intricate textures seemed to radiate from the canvas, captivating the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer began. This extraordinary piece by emerging artist David Carter is a testament to the power of resilience and self-expression. Bidding will start at $50,000. David held his breath as the first paddle went up, followed by another, and another. The bids climbed steadily, $100,000, $150,000, $200,000. By the time the gavel struck, Eclipsing Shadows had sold for an astonishing $325,000. The room erupted in applause, and David felt a rush of emotions, gratitude, disbelief, and a sense of validation he had longed for his entire life. Meanwhile, Victoria Harding was beginning to hear more and more about the artist she had so carelessly dismissed. News of David's auction success reached her through a colleague, who raved about his talent. "You must have heard of him, Victoria," the colleague said over lunch. "David Carter? His work is incredible. He's the kind of artist who comes along once in a generation." Victoria frowned, the name tugging at her memory. "David Carter," she repeated slowly. And then it hit her, the young man she had mocked in her gallery months ago. Her mind raced as she recalled the encounter. She had barely looked at his work, dismissing it with a few cutting remarks. Now, the same artist was being hailed as a rising star, his paintings selling for more than many of her own featured artists. She couldn't ignore the growing buzz around David. Collectors who had once flocked to her gallery were now talking about him. Her own clients began questioning why she hadn't discovered him first. For the first time in her career, Victoria felt the sting of regret. David, however, remained focused on his art and his newfound platform. With Sophia's guidance, he began planning his first solo exhibition, a collection of works that would tell the story of his journey. As the exhibition date approached, David received an unexpected call. "Mr. Carter, this is Elizabeth from the Hawthorne Auction House. We've had an inquiry from someone interested in purchasing several of your pieces." "It's Victoria Harding." David was silent for a moment, the name sinking in. "Victoria Harding?" he repeated. "Yes," Elizabeth confirmed. "She's expressed interest in meeting with you to discuss a potential collaboration." David couldn't help but chuckle softly. The irony was almost too much. "Tell her I'll think about it," he said, a knowing smile spreading across his face. The days following the auction were a blur for David. His life, which had once been defined by uncertainty and struggle, was now a whirlwind of meetings, offers, and new opportunities. His art had transcended its original intent, it had become a movement. Sophia was by his side every step of the way, guiding him through the maze of collectors, curators, and gallery owners vying for his work. But David remained grounded, always returning to his studio, pouring his soul into each piece. In the months that followed, his name appeared in art publications, newspapers, and interviews. David Carter, the new face of modern abstract art. From struggle to stardom, the incredible rise of David Carter. The headlines were everywhere. His paintings were featured in prestigious galleries across the country, and soon, the world. But it wasn't just the art world that took notice. Celebrities, politicians, and tech moguls began to purchase his work for their private collections. David's art had become a symbol of resilience, an emblem of overcoming adversity. One morning, as David reviewed a new batch of emails, he came across one from the prestigious Elysian Gallery in Paris. The message was brief but to the point. "Dear Mr. Carter, we are eager to host your first European solo exhibition at our gallery. Please let us know when you're available to discuss the details. Sincerely, Elysian Gallery." David sat back in his chair, his mind racing. A solo exhibition in Paris. The thought seemed surreal, but it was becoming a reality. Meanwhile, back in the United States, Victoria Harding was beginning to feel the full weight of her earlier dismissal of David. Her once thriving gallery was struggling. The art scene had changed, and her refusal to adapt to the rise of new artists like David had cost her. She had heard whispers of his growing fame from her colleagues, and each mention felt like a sharp jab. At a recent gala, one of her clients, a wealthy collector, had asked her about David. "Have you considered reaching out to him, Victoria?" they had asked. "He's the next big thing, and I think his work would fit perfectly in your collection." Victoria had forced a smile. "I'm aware of Mr. Carter's work," she replied stiffly. "But I prefer to work with more established artists." Her client, a longtime patron, raised an eyebrow. "Established? His work is already fetching 6 figures at auction, and he's being compared to the greats. You might want to reconsider." Victoria's face flushed with embarrassment. The world had changed, and she had failed to keep up. As David's fame grew, so did the offers flooding in. Yet, despite his meteoric rise, there was one thing that David had yet to experience: he had never been to a true gallery opening of his own. Sure, his paintings had been displayed in various exhibitions, but nothing had felt like a personal milestone. That changed one evening when Sophia called him with an offer that would change the course of his career. "David, I've arranged for you to have your own solo exhibition at the Cavalier Gallery in New York. It's one of the most prestigious in the country. They've never hosted a newcomer like this before. This is the moment you've been waiting for." David was speechless for a moment. He had heard of the Cavalier Gallery. It was a space where legends were made. To have his own exhibition, there was more than he had ever dreamed. Sophia continued, her voice tinged with excitement. "They've already offered you a spot at their fall gala. And the auction house is ready to sell 3 of your pieces. This could be the pinnacle of your career." David's heart raced. He had come so far. He thought of the long nights in his cramped apartment, the rejection, the struggle. He had proven himself, not just to the art world, but to himself. "I'm in," he said with a grin. "Let's do it." As the date of his exhibition drew near, the anticipation around David reached fever pitch. Invitations to the event were coveted, and the press couldn't stop writing about him. The night before the gala, David stood in front of a mirror in his apartment, adjusting the tie around his neck. He hardly recognized the man staring back at him. He was no longer the young artist struggling to be seen. He was David Carter, the artist who had shattered expectations and redefined the art world. Sophia arrived at his apartment to escort him to the event. "You ready?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with pride. David nodded, taking a deep breath. "Ready." The Cavalier Gallery was everything David had imagined and more. The marble floors gleamed, and the chandeliers overhead sparkled with opulence. As the doors opened, a sea of well-dressed guests flooded the room. The air buzzed with excitement as David's paintings hung on the pristine white walls, their colors popping in contrast to the gallery's minimalist design. For the first time, David felt like he truly belonged. But as he walked through the crowd, he caught sight of a familiar face. Victoria Harding stood at the far end of the gallery, holding a glass of champagne and speaking with a group of potential clients. Her presence felt like a slap in the face. David's stomach twisted with a strange mixture of anger and satisfaction. Victoria had once mocked him, dismissed him as insignificant. Now, she was here, in his space, surrounded by people eager to buy his work. Sophia noticed the look on his face. "David, let it go," she said softly. "You've already won." David took a deep breath, straightened his back, and smiled. He had won. And soon, he would show the world just how much he had overcome. Months passed, and David's name continued to soar within the art world. His solo exhibition at Cavalier Gallery had been an unprecedented success, cementing his reputation as one of the most promising contemporary artists of his generation. Collectors and curators clamored for his pieces, and his work was becoming a staple in elite art collections worldwide. But the bright lights and constant recognition only fueled a burning desire within David for something greater, something beyond personal success. He had seen how the art world, despite its promises of creativity and freedom, was still dominated by elitism and exclusivity. It was a system that held many talented artists, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, at bay. And that, David realized, was a system he was ready to dismantle. One afternoon, David sat with Sophia in her office, the walls adorned with artwork from some of the most celebrated artists of the modern era. The two of them had been discussing potential future projects for hours, but David's mind was elsewhere. "David, you've come so far," Sophia said, her voice tinged with awe. "Your work is being shown in major museums, you've sold millions in pieces, and your influence is growing. What's next for you?" David took a deep breath, eyes glinting with determination. "I've been thinking about something bigger. I want to change the art world itself." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I want to own a gallery," David said, leaning forward. "But not just any gallery. I want to buy Victoria Harding's gallery, the Harding Gallery." Sophia stared at him in shock. "Victoria's gallery? She's one of the most established names in the industry. Why would you want that old, stuffy place?" David smirked. "Because she's built it on the backs of artists like me. Artists who she dismissed, belittled, and rejected. If I buy her gallery, I can change the way the art world works. I'll open it up to new voices, new perspectives, and I'll give the underrepresented artists a platform they've never had before." Sophia smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Now that's a plan I can get behind." David had learned everything he needed to about the art business, how galleries operated, how to make successful acquisitions, and the power dynamics that shaped the industry. He had studied the Harding Gallery for months, watching its gradual decline under Victoria's leadership. Despite her once imposing reputation, Victoria had failed to adapt to the changing tides of the art world. Her gallery had become a symbol of outdated ideals, a place that no longer attracted the young, dynamic artists that were shaping the future of contemporary art. David knew that the gallery was struggling financially, and that fact gave him the leverage he needed. Through a network of trusted advisors, he quietly made an offer to purchase the Harding Gallery, knowing that Victoria would be unable to refuse. Weeks later, as the ink dried on the paperwork, David found himself the proud new owner of the gallery. He didn't even need to notify Victoria personally, she would find out soon enough, just as he had found out so many months ago that she had underestimated him. David invited Sophia and a few close friends to the gallery's reopening event. The space, once cold and uninviting, had been completely transformed. The walls were now lined with vibrant works by emerging artists from diverse backgrounds. There was a sense of energy in the air, a palpable excitement that had been missing for years. Sophia marveled at the transformation. "This is incredible, David," she said, surveying the space. "You've turned it into a true cultural hub." David nodded, a sense of pride swelling within him. "This is just the beginning. This gallery is going to be a place where artists aren't just showcased, they're celebrated for who they are. No more elitism. No more barriers." As the guests began to arrive, David's heart raced with anticipation. He had invited the very people who had once doubted him, the critics who had laughed at his dreams. Now, they would be walking into his world, a world where talent wasn't defined by background or appearance, but by the power of one's vision. It wasn't long before Victoria appeared, stepping through the gallery's doors with a group of high-profile clients. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, noticing the unfamiliar faces and the artworks that now filled the space. For a moment, she seemed disoriented, like a queen walking into a kingdom she no longer ruled. David's gaze locked onto hers from across the room. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, followed by a flash of confusion. She hadn't yet realized who the new owner was. Sophia leaned in, whispering, "This is it." "She has no idea." David smiled, savoring the moment. "She'll figure it out soon enough." As the evening wore on, the crowd grew larger. The buzz in the gallery was electric, with people discussing the new direction David had set for the space. He spoke with various artists, collectors, and influencers, his presence commanding attention. But he kept a close eye on Victoria, who was still mingling with her guests, trying to make sense of the sudden shift in the gallery's atmosphere. Finally, David walked over to her, his expression calm but resolute. "Victoria," he said, extending a hand. "I'm glad you could make it." Victoria's eyes widened as she shook his hand, her smile faltering. "David Carter?" He nodded, his voice smooth. "That's right. I'm the new owner of the Harding Gallery." For a moment, Victoria was speechless. The realization of what had just happened hit her like a wave. The gallery she had spent decades building, now in the hands of the very artist she had once mocked. Victoria stammered. "You've taken over my gallery?" David Carter had changed the art world, and in doing so, he had changed the world itself.